ברוכים המצטרפים לוובינר של Science Abroad. למי מכם שמצטרף לראשונה, הוובינרים הם חלק מהפעילות הרחבה שמפעיל Science Abroad לחיבור בין מדענים ומדעניות ישראלים בחו"ל וישראל, בתמיכת המרכז לקליטה במדע והאגף לעידוד יזמות עסקית של משרד העלייה והקליטה. אם טרם נרשמתם אלינו באתר, אנא יירשמו והצטרפו גם לפעילות במרכזים שלנו בקמפוסים. אני מיד אשלח לינק בצ'אט. להרשמה לסיינס אברוד בחינם כדי להפוך לחברים שלנו ולקבל את הלינקים לכל ההכשרות והסמינרים, הכל אפשר לעשות זאת בקלות באתר שלנו ולהיות מיודעים. הוובינר הנוכחי הוא מוקלט ותוכלו לצפות בהקלטה בפייסבוק או בעוד מספר ימים באתר שלנו. נמצא איתנו פרופסור דוב גרינבאום, and I'm going to switch to English just for the introduction. Professor Dov Greenbaum directs the Mitther Institute for Legal Implications of Emerging Technologies at Reichman University, formerly the IDC in Herzliya, and is a research fellow at Yale University. Dov has degrees and postdocs from Yeshiva University, Yale University, the University of California, Berkeley, Stanford University, and ETH Zurich. Dov is a licensed attorney in the state of California and before the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and is a certified information privacy professional. Dov, thank you for joining us. The stage is yours.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see it.
Indeed,
okay.
We can see it.
Okay, so thank you, Nadav. Thank you for inviting me. Beraşo, this will be in English, so hopefully that won't be problematic. So my talk today will be about artificial intelligence and the ethics and regulation thereof. As many of you know, this is likely, and it is a very timely topic. Just looking online today, this actually isn't today, this is from a couple days ago, but very relevant to today. The use of AI is being used for OSINT, for open source intelligence, to try and assess all the information that we're picking up with regard to the Russian incursion into Ukraine. And again, the use of this AI in warfare is very much an ethical question that needs to be tackled. Now, the reality is that I'm not the first to talk about AI ethics. I'm not going to be the last. And in fact, there is a universal and global sort of demand for this area. So for example, both the Chinese government and the World Economic Forum have both sort of promoted this idea of AI ethics literacy. And what does that mean? Well, according to the World Economic Forum, this relates to this idea that because of COVID and because of the COVID crisis, there has been a push to roll out AI initiatives. The ethics and the governance of these systems, these AI systems, remain unclear, and we need to think about AI and the ethical issues associated with it to make sure that we're implementing AI in the most reasonable and most ethical, most responsible fashion. And again, to this end, at least the World Economic Forum and Chinese governments as well, and many other governments, but these are two of the major players here that have been pushing AI ethics. One is to broaden the existing dialogues around the ethics of AI and the rules of the road for artificial intelligence. The second is to talk about AI ethics such that it's being translated into meaningful action. And of course, the third is that to make sure that this dialogue with regard to AI and ethics isn't confined to us, to the ivory tower. And again, for those of you, you're all in some sort of academic institution, and this is also very recent information. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, has announced a $125 million fund for looking into the various issues in regards to AI research. It's a little ironic if you've been following Google and its AI research ethics problems. University of Florida has also sort of announced this as well. I couldn't find anyone else who's announced this, but University of Florida is clearly one of the academic institutions that is being chosen by Google to focus on artificial intelligence and ethics. Now, to get us into the mindset of thinking about AI and ethics, I thought I'd ask you guys a question. Now, of course, in this forum, I can't get your answers, but perhaps just something to think about that'll get our minds sort of going. And that is, should this man, this person, this being, this thing, have legal rights? And while you mull over that question, I've been asked to talk a little bit about my institute and Reichman University in general. So while you mull over that, I'll give you a quick history. So I liked when my students give talks professionally, I tell them that they should put on their white coat. They should explain how they are relevant to the particular issue at hand. And so this is my white coat. And Nadav has already explained that I have multiple affiliations and with multiple institutions. I don't know, go Bulldogs, go Bears, go Trees, go Max, whatever team you're affiliated with or like to follow. I didn't follow any of them. I practiced law in a number of law firms where I was working in the area of biopharmaceuticals and later in the area of artificial intelligence and algorithms and the like. And of course, now I am at the Reichman University, a professor of law, and I also run an institute called the Mitzar Institute for Legal Implications of Emerging Technologies. I should put in this caveat now. I tend to speak quickly. When I watch my Netflix, I watch it at 1.5x. That's as fast as it's going to go. When I listen to my podcasts, I listen to them at 2.3, 2.4x. So my internal system says that speaking quickly is normal. It's probably not, so I apologize in advance for that. In any event, the Mitzar Institute has been around since 2014. It's named after our primary benefactor, the late Mitzar. You may know him from his law firm that he founded, the Mitzar law firm. And broadly, our institute looks at the ethical, the legal, and the social implications of new and emerging technologies, be that in the biotech area, the high-tech area, the green tech area. We're broadly interested in all the techs. We're constantly looking for new people to interact with, new people in various institutions to develop collaborations with. If this is something that interests you, then please contact me because we're keen on interacting with as many institutions as possible in putting together research papers, examinations of various interactions and intersections between law, society, and technology. I was also asked to give a quick overview of Reichman University. So for those who don't know, Reichman University is formerly the Merkaz HaBein-Tchumi, the IDC in Herzliya. Just to give you some information about it, it's a very sort of cosmopolitan university, probably the most cosmopolitan university in the country. Supposedly we have more than 2,000 students representing more than 90 countries. So Hebrew is often not the language you'll hear on campus. Clearly you can see I stole this information from Wikipedia, and it seems like I've left in a little link from Wikipedia in my slide. I apologize for that. We have various schools in Reichman University, including a school of government, international school, a school of business, a school of computer science, a school of communications, a school of psychology, school of economics, school of sustainability, school of entrepreneurship, and school of law. If you're coming back to Israel anytime soon, you should know that the school has expanded. We now have master's programs in many of these schools, both in Hebrew and in English. And we also actually offer PhD programs in a handful of these schools as well, including the law school. So that's my pitch for Reichman University and my institute. Let's get back to this talk about artificial intelligence and ethics. So I'd like to start off with a quick story. Many of you may be familiar with this, but I'll tell it anyways. Way back when, in 1815, Mount Tambora, which is not this island, this is not this volcano. Mount Tambora is represented in the satellite image on the right, top right, and in the Google Maps on the bottom right, it's a mountain, it's a volcano in Indonesia. And in 1815, this mountain, this volcano exploded. It's actually the largest recorded eruption in human history. The explosion was heard supposedly on Sumatra, which is 2,000 kilometers away. The extent of the explosion actually reduced the height of the mountain from 4,300 meters to 2,800 meters, and at least 71,000 people died soon after the explosion as a result of the explosion of the volcano. Now, you may be asking, why is this relevant to artificial intelligence and ethics? Well, nothing in 1815 per se happened, but in the following year, in 1816, this was known as the year without a summer. The eruption of the volcano contributed to climate anomalies across the planet. In June in Boston, if any of you is on Boston BU or Boston College or Harvard or MIT or any of those second-rate universities, clearly I have allegiance to Yale. But oh man, it's not Facebook. I take that back. All of those schools are amazing. Without a doubt, all of them are amazing. In any event, crops failed across the planet. European weather was severely impacted. Multiple people died as a result of this. And as people do in miserable summers, they go off to Lake Geneva. And actually what happened was a number of famous, semi-famous, and not so famous people ended up in John Milton's former place on the shores of Lake Geneva. This will be actually relevant because John Milton, as many of you know, or if you watch Lucifer, I guess, he's famous for Paradise Lost. In any event, we have a number of people off and moving towards Lake Geneva, four of them, and including a young woman named Mary, who has unfortunately lost her first child and now is pregnant out of wedlock with the child of her married lover, Percy. So Mary, Percy, and their in-laws run off to the shores of Lake Geneva. And again, I can't interact with you, but many of you know that on the shores of Lake Geneva, Mary formulated a book that she called The Modern Prometheus. And that was just one of the names of the book. The Modern Prometheus, as many of you know, Prometheus in Greek mythology stole the fire from the gods, and as a result, he was punished by Zeus for eternity. And what does this mean, stealing the fire from gods? How does this relate to this book? Well, the other name of the book is called Frankenstein. Right, and in Frankenstein, I think what we see is, at least as Mary Shelley points out, is we have a professor, a scientist, a mad scientist, Dr. Frankenstein. By the way, it's conventional wisdom has it that the monster's name is Frankenstein. I truly believe that Dr. Frankenstein is a monster, but the actual monster in the book is actually only referred to as the monster. In any event, Frankenstein takes essentially the power of the gods and imbues it in this life in a monster and creates actual life. And Mary Shelley saw this as science going too far, as we may say today, scientists playing God. And what we see particularly in the West is this idea that we are often influenced in how we think about emerging technologies based on this book and, of course, the movies and whatever comes up in popular culture. Many of you may remember or may have seen Frankenberries, or that's cereal, or you may have heard genetically modified food referred to as Frankenfoods. Why? Because in Western culture, we seem to associate when we feel that man has taken power beyond what they should, we refer to it with the prefix Franken. And in the book, for example, we have a quote: "The circumstances of his existence were so monstrous and uncommon, his original goodness was gradually turned into the fuel of inextinguishable misanthropy and revenge," right? The monster, even if we created it good, becomes evil. And we see this as well. Even today, remember, as I spoke about earlier, this connection between artificial intelligence and warfare. So we have the Future of Life Institute demanding that autonomous weapons be restricted and diminished, and its use diminished, and the use of artificial intelligence in warfare be reduced. This open letter was signed by a number of professors and academics, including people who aren't professors and academics but are well respected in the area of artificial intelligence, including Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak and Stephen Hawking. So we have a number of people who see that AI is particularly problematic. Even if our intents are good, we can always assume that they'll go bad, And of course, again, Mary Shelley goes, "A race of devils will be propagated upon the earth to make the full existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror." Again, this becomes part of science fiction. It becomes part of our Weltanschauung, this idea that, Skynet, artificial intelligence will destroy mankind. Now, I'm not the first and I'm not the last to draw this connection between Frankenstein and modern ethics and how we see emerging technologies. In fact, for you scientists out there, Science magazine for the 200th anniversary of the publication of Mary Shelley's book, which was published, I think, in 2018, even though she had come up with the story in 1816. She only published it in 1818. So the Science magazine bicentennial came out in 2018, and of course, the cover of the journal and multiple articles within the journal all refer to what they call the long shadow of Frankenstein. This idea that Frankenstein permeates how we think about all these sorts of emerging technologies, whether it be genomics, whether it be artificial intelligence, whether it be neuroscience, in all these areas. We always come back to this primary story of Frankenstein. I would be remiss without acknowledging that I am somewhat biased here. I also had an article in that edition of Science where I reviewed actually a revised version or an edited version of Frankenstein, where the authors also called into this relationship between artificial intelligence, emerging technologies, and how the West feels about Frankenstein, which is typically that Frankenstein is bad, artificial intelligence is bad. Now, of course, it's interesting because in the East, what we see is less so. And of course, I think most of you are primarily from the West. But, if you think about, there's a spoiler here if you haven't seen some of these shows or films. If you haven't seen Westworld, I apologize in advance. But in the West, we often see films, television shows where the robots are evil. Well, in sort of Eastern cultures, robots are typically not evil. Of course, this may be, and I say maybe chalked up to this idea that, again, in the West, we had Frankenstein, and it officially influenced us in many different ways in how we see emerging technologies, less so in the East. So let's get down to brass tacks. I've been talking a bit about Frankenstein, artificial intelligence, but I haven't really defined it. So what is AI? I think it's a little bit like Justice Potter Stewart sort of said in another famous case in the 1960s from the United States Supreme Court. You know it when you see it, because it's really hard to set a definition for the technology. It was first developed by scientists such as John McCarthy and Marvin Mirsky in the 1950s. It's used in many different tech sectors now. And of course, both historically and today, AI can mean many different things, which causes confusion both in the financial world in the popular culture world, but particularly in, I would argue, in the regulatory world and the legal world, if you can't define something, it makes it very difficult to regulate it. And to wit, this was an article in the MIT Tech Review, go MIT students, that around 40% of the European companies, this already back a couple of years, who claimed that they were AI were in fact not AI. And so whether or not they were doing it intentionally or not, we're a little bit fuzzy on what AI is and what AI isn't. And I'm not going to even try and define it or regulate it or define it, but even if we could define it, we also have to think about how we might go about regulating this technology. And what do I mean by how do you regulate it? I'm saying that if a government or a group feels that AI technology is particularly problematic or could lead to problems, you know, how do you perceive this technology? Do you perceive it? Do you say, well, let's say all AI should be this, or all AI should be that? So that would be regulating it, perhaps, let's say, as a monolith, which is how many European nations are thinking about doing it. The alternative, perhaps, is thinking about it technology by technology. So regulating machine learning or regulating deep learning, perhaps as a way to think about how to regulate artificial intelligence. So again, you could regulate it by technology or technology. You could also regulate it via each particular sector. So you could say within artificial intelligence, there are uses for it in medicine, there are uses for it in criminal law, there are uses for it in manufacturing. So in each sector, you could say, you know, for artificial intelligence cars, they're regulated like this. For artificial intelligence vacuums, they're regulated like that. Or perhaps even implementation by implementation. So even within a particular sector, you could say in the health sector, artificially intelligent surgical robots are regulated like this. Artificially intelligent software that tells you whether or not you're depressed would be regulated like that. So again, it's not clear how one would go about regulating artificial intelligence. Even if we could define it, there are many different opportunities and options to think about that. Now, of course, the Europeans, like I mentioned, are thinking about it in terms of a monolith, and the Americans are confused up the wazoo. They're really not sure about it, how to go about doing that. Again, so arguably, if we could define it, we might be able to regulate it. But where is AI today? When we're talking about AI, what are we even talking about? Is this all sort of science fiction, or is this real world stuff? So just to give you some interesting sort of facts, speech recognition was on par with humans by 2017. Image captioning was on par with humans by 2020. You know, being able to conversationally ask questions and provide answers was by 2019. Object recognition by 2016. So you know, there's a lot of stuff that AI can do right now that is pretty good, pretty much like a human. So why is it relevant to you? Regardless of what part of science or social sciences or whatever you're doing in your academic field, I would argue that artificial intelligence is very relevant to whatever you end up going into. And why is that? Well, I mean, the market size is ginormous, right? By 2024, in 2 years, it's thought that the market size will be $500 billion. I mean, you know, that's pretty big, not huge, but pretty big in terms of its relevancy across the board. If you want to go into some sort of startup, AI funding is, again, this is 2019, IDC, Reichman University gets free access to Statista. So, you know, I like to use their stuff. Sometimes a lot out of date, but again, artificial intelligence startup funding is you know, on huge in terms of how much money is being pumped into companies that claim to be using artificial intelligence. And even the business leaders, we don't even have to go to scientists, even business leaders seem to think that artificial intelligence will have a bigger impact than the internet, will replace jobs. So again, there is this idea that artificial intelligence is up and coming, The business world thinks it's valuable. The academic world thinks it's valuable. We still don't know what it means. We still don't know how to regulate it, but it's here. And we can imagine that it's going to be everywhere. Now, again, arguing that we could define it and we could regulate it, there's still some very hard questions to ask with regard to artificial intelligence. And I'll give you perhaps an example. If there's any Canadians amongst you or anyone in any Canadian institution, Dundas Street, a venerable street in Toronto, was voted to be renamed because the street that is arguably 100 kilometers long, that was named in 1796, is associated with someone who could be tangentially called not enough against slave trade. You know, again, he was against slave trade, but he wasn't enough against slave trade. And this was already in the, the 1700s, when, the world was very different. So what was ethical today may be important tomorrow. So what we were fine with Dundas for 200 plus years, we know are no longer fine with Mr. Dundas and his legacy. On the flip side, what is important today may be ethical tomorrow. So in vitro fertilization has been, when it first came out, like Frankenstein, it was perceived to be playing God. It was perceived to be putting power into the hands of humans that should not be in the power of humans. And so, but that's no longer the case. Now we freely talk about artificial IVF as a technology that, if you read People magazine, and I don't, but if you did, it's probably on the cover every other week. Someone is doing IVF, and is no longer ethically important. So ethics changes. And of course, so given that caveat, we have to think about how do we deal with the concerns that we have with artificial intelligence. So one of the things that we could do is create laws, regulate, put things on the book that say, this is how we deal with artificial intelligence. These are the rules and regulations that governments have put down. That's one way to do it. Strict sort of rules and regulations. An alternative is develop a set of ethical guidelines, a little more fuzzy than the law, perhaps a little more able to keep up with the times than the law. But again, something that comes from on high and is developed, and companies will implement, or individuals will implement their AI technologies, keeping in mind the ethical guidelines that have been promulgated. Another opportunity is perhaps self-regulation. Perhaps companies say, we will decide how to regulate AI as we see fit, and you as the consumer will hope that we do it properly. So that's another opportunity. And another way to think about how to deal with it is perhaps technological solutions. Thinking about, not a form of self-regulation. I don't know if any of you have drones, but there are places, even here in Israel, where your drone will not fly. Why? Geofences have been implemented by the drone technology that essentially says, if you're in this area and this is a no-fly zone, the technology itself will implement whatever rules and regulations or decisions we have decided, and so it won't fly. So we could have, like Isaac Asimov and his laws of robotics, 4 rules or 3 rules or however many you want to count them that are implemented in the technology. So when you implement AI in whatever sector technology you're implementing it, you will have the technology itself will regulate itself. We won't have to worry about laws and rules and regulations and ethics of applying them, because the technology itself will apply it. Which gets me, I think, to another question I'd like to ask you. And of course, I have no way of gauging what your feelings are about this. But when we're thinking about artificial intelligence, and when we're thinking about other sorts of emerging technologies, my question to you is, are there technologies that are so evil that have no redeeming value that they should be regulated out of existence? Perhaps artificial intelligence in warfare, we should argue, should be regulated out of existence. We shouldn't have, the law should say, no artificial intelligence in warfare. Now, of course, it's clearly impossible. But again, are there technologies that are inherently so problematic that they should be regulated out of existence? Now, I personally believe that technologies are essentially amoral, that it's how we're implementing them that becomes problematic. And of course, technologies like facial recognition technology in your Ring doorbell or the Google glasses, they seem to be good on the surface, but people will find problems with them. And of course, even if we would say that, who gets to decide whether or not something is inherently so horrible that we should regulate it out of existence? And how would we even go about regulating out of existence? So the Europeans actually have a method for doing that, and that is through the patent system, where you cannot patent things that go against order public. So things that are so offensive to society, you can't patent. If you can't patent, makes it harder to develop the technology and protect the technology. So that's one way to do it. I'm of the personal opinion that I don't think that the patent examiners are the right people to decide whether or not something is ethically abhorrent or not. And I don't think the patent system is the right system that should decide whether or not something is ethically abhorrent or not. And again, I also believe that there are no technologies that are on their face so ethically problematic that they should be regulated out of existence. So I've sort of implied that AI is scary. It should be regulated. It should be defined. Some people may say that it should be regulated out of existence. But what are the fears that we have that are associated with artificial intelligence? What is it that people are so afraid of that will go awry in the area of artificial intelligence? So some of the fears, and I'll just give you a handful of examples here. One of the fears is this idea of bias and discrimination. This idea that when we all acknowledge that humans are biased and they discriminate. If anyone saw the show Avenue Q, there's a little song about that, the Broadway show with puppets. So there is this feeling that humans are inherently biased and discriminatory. And the reality is that AI is also, to some degree, biased and discriminatory because of the computer science maxim, garbage in, garbage out. The underlying data that feeds our AI monsters is inherently problematic, often inherently problematic, and often just sort of takes those biases, the human-created data, takes those biases and implements them throughout the artificial intelligence implementation. And so again, there's this fear that AI sort of whitewashes this human bias, but the bias is retained. And so there is this fear that our artificial intelligence is biased. Another fear that people have associated with artificial intelligence is this idea of denial of individual autonomy. If any of you have ever purchased anything on Amazon or ever bought something that you didn't really think you needed, but then Amazon sort of told you that you needed, and then you went out and bought it, it's this idea that that AI sort of, the use of AI can take away my rights and my decision-making abilities. And of course, given that it's distributed, it makes it really hard to make someone liable for how it takes away my rights and my liberties and my autonomy. So this is another concern associated with artificial intelligence. Of course, one that you may have heard of lots of is this idea that artificial intelligence is opaque, it's not transparent. You can't see the process that it's using in order to come up with its outcome. Of course, in the human world, we also can't, our humans are also opaque. They're also pretty good at lying. And so figuring out what the human is thinking about is just as hard, or if not as hard, as figuring out how the artificial intelligence machine is figuring out how it gets to its final decision. And so this is, again, some sort of fear that they're not transparent, they're not accountable, the outcomes are often unjustified. Additional concerns are related to privacy. All the data that artificial intelligence demands in order to feed the artificial intelligence monster, it somehow infringes on our privacy. And in addition, we don't have to look further than the events in Ottawa this past week, and these past couple of weeks, where AI can promote social isolation by creating echo chambers in our social media and feeding us what we want to hear, and having us be influenced by the same sort of thoughts that get hammered in, not giving us opportunities to hear outside information and other opinions that are different than us. And so, you know, being stuck in these social media echo chambers that are created by artificial intelligence can create really social problems, again, as perhaps indicated these past couple of weeks in Ottawa. And of course, people are fearful of the safety and reliability of artificially intelligent machines. Can we trust them? Can we trust our smart vehicles not to kill people, not to maim people, not to harm people? So again, these are some of just a handful of the concerns that exist within the area of artificial intelligence. Now, I've been told that I only have 45 minutes, so I guess I leave time for questions and answers. So I may run through a couple of these relatively quickly. But just to give you some examples of ethical concerns with artificial intelligence, some actual real life concerns. So for example, in the area of corporate responsibility, Microsoft developed a artificially intelligent Twitter bot. And any of you who have been on Twitter, Twitter's not owned by Facebook, is it? No, so I can say, I don't have to be so positive about it, but Twitter is not necessarily the best place on the planet for, you know, for hearing other opinions. You know, there's a lot of nasty stuff that goes on in Twitter, a lot of good stuff that goes on in Twitter, and a lot of nasty stuff that goes on in Twitter as well. Microsoft developed what they called Tay.ai, this Twitter bot that, you know, go forth and discover Twitter and become the excellent Twitterer. And within, you know, a short time, Tay became a misogynistic, anti-Semitic, racially charged Twitter bot, because again, it learned from its environments. And so there is this concern that these, you know, there is corporate responsibility that's required when we're developing artificial intelligent sort of machines. Now, of course, Microsoft, I think, was sued for this this Twitter bot that it created, but not by any of the people that may have been affected by its offensive language or anything like that, but actually I think by Taylor Swift. I think it was probably settled out of court, but I think Taylor Swift, for logical reasons, sued Microsoft for this bot.
Professor Grinbaum, you have time. You don't have to rush, and if you need more than 45 minutes, that's totally fine.
Okay,
it's fascinating enough to cover all aspects.
Actually, that's a great point. I would like to say that AI and ethics is a ginormous field, and I'm only trying to give you guys a taste. I'm not trying to be comprehensive in any way. This is not even scratching the surface. But okay, so another example I think that may be relevant is in the area of facial recognition technology. So facial recognition technology often uses artificial intelligence technologies, and as ethical investigators such as Margaret Mitchell and Timnit Gebru, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, found that, for example, AI FRT facial recognition technology did not consistently recognize black faces, and they found this to be offensive and problematic, particularly because, and like I said, you know, artificial intelligence feeds off of the big data it's fed to some degree, and a lot of that big data of images and stuff like that was perhaps primarily white. And so it failed to recognize black faces. There have been other sorts of instances where black people have been sort of targeted because of facial recognition technology. And so there's been a lot of sort of people hitting down on facial recognition technology for being racist and problematic. And a number of major corporations actually put it on hold because of the concerns that were associated with it. So another concern comes up in the area of human rights. So we just finished up the Olympics in China, and China is by far no slouch in the area of offensive human rights or human rights offenses. And one of the areas which is kind of problematic is this idea of sesame credit, this idea that, and again, it's unclear, or at least it's unclear to me, how exactly the technology is implemented, but I do know, or I do suspect that artificial intelligence is part of this. And essentially what you do is you're getting credit. If anyone's seen Black Mirror, the episode called Nosedive, this is essentially what's going on in China right now, where you are given a score regarding how good a Chinese citizen you are. And you are given benefits and you are given demerits, depending on how good a Chinese citizen you are. And so, you know, the implementation of this technology via artificial intelligence creates real sort of concerns about governments overextending their control over their society. In the area of our previous, in the pandemic, of course, there are concerns with contact tracing, the use of AI technology for contact tracing, the use of the AI technology in other things, for example, what NSO has been suggested to have done here in Israel. Of course, I think the latest reports are the police did not use it without warrants. I'm not really clear on what's going on. But again, this idea that it can sort of collect sort of metadata about us and then infer very private information about us just from that metadata is disconcerting with regard to artificial intelligence. Another area of artificial intelligence which creates ethical concerns is in the area of warfare. So I'll give you an example. This is a failing CWIS, a closed-in weapon system. It is an autonomous system, but it's not an artificially intelligent system. It's essentially this, you know, it's been around since the 1980s, so a half a century, prototyping as early as the 1970s. The technology is available to at least 24 countries around the world, including Australia, Japan, Norway, South Korea, Spain, and the US, which developed the technology. But this is not an artificially intelligent machine. This is an autonomous automatic machine. It just shoots out anything in the sky. I think there was some sort of movie. I don't know what it was. Was it Battleship? I don't know what it was. Where this technology was put into play, which gets to this important idea, regardless of whether or not we're talking about warfare or any other uses, we should make a distinction between technology that is automatic and technology that is sort of artificially intelligent. This is automatic. There isn't a human in the loop here, but it's definitely not artificially intelligent. You know, so you know this robot seems to be intelligent. It's creating Chinese characters, and we have a Roomba that's kind of stuck in a frame. Ironically, the Roomba is probably AI, and this robot is just autonomous. So again, it's always not clear, and this is the distinction going back to the definition of artificially intelligent. Is this something actually artificially intelligent, or is it just sort of automatic? Now, again, regardless of whether or not it's Ring developing doorbells, it's Roomba or iRobot developing a Roomba, or it's the use of warfare, a military developing AI. There are the general public, you know, has some confidence in these sorts of industries to develop AI. We have university researchers, you guys, we're pretty confident that you'll do it well. Less so Facebook and Apple and Google, actually, interestingly enough. So the public in general has concerns with regard to AI ethics. So what can we do? You know, what is it that you as researchers, what is it that you as people in industry, people in technology, what can you do to reduce some of these fears associated with AI? So, for example, I have a list of things that we can deal with. So, for example, in the area of reliability, this is a research project that was done some time ago, that it became very easy to trick autonomous vehicles, I think maybe even Teslas, to not appreciate that something was a stop sign by just putting stickers on the stop sign. And of course, this creates fear within the general society, as if we're going to make an autonomous and AI vehicle, if it doesn't recognize a modded stop sign, do we trust it to be on the road? So this is a fear associated with AI technology. Another thing that we can do is work out the fairness and the biases of the AI technology. So many of you may be familiar with this technology called Compass. It sort of helps judges and parole boards figure out what to do with criminals, whether or not they should be placed on parole, whether or not they should get bail, all these sorts of things. And consistently it was found, this is by a study by ProPublica, consistently it was found that Black individuals were rated to be more problematic for the criminal justice system than white individuals. For no reason. These people were equivalent in terms of the crimes they had committed in the past and in the present, and yet the system consistently rated the whites as less problematic for the system than Black. So this is a bias that needs to be tackled and taken and dealt with. Interestingly enough, I actually gave a similar talk like this to a group from the Netherlands. And I tried to show that this was a bias in the AI system because I did a Google image search for nurse, and all I got were female nurses. And what I quickly found out was actually the term that I had put in was the feminine word for nurse, not the masculine word for nurse. So of course, Google image would show me lots of female nurses. Now, interestingly enough, it actually does show AI bias. Why? Because when I asked Google Translate to translate nurse into Dutch, it gave me the feminine nurse term and not both the male and the feminine male. So actually, this actually does show an insidious form of AI bias, and that assumes that nurses are females. I did the same thing with regard to electrical engineers. And again, it gave me the male term. And again, what we do see is AI biases again. You know, we should be concerned, but particularly with Putin extending his powers into the Ukraine today, tomorrow, whatever. He personally believes that artificial intelligence is the future for all of humankind, and essentially whoever becomes the leader in this will become the ruler of the world. He clearly wants to become ruler of the world, and so there is a concern that when we deal with artificial intelligence, we think about who's implementing the technology. And to some degree, this goes to the NSO issues earlier this year and late last year. You know, who has access to this technology can create real concerns. And so if you're developing a technology in the area of artificial intelligence, perhaps consider who you're going to sell the technology to, who you're going to give access to the technology to. We talked about inclusivity, talked about transparency, this idea that an artificially intelligent machine we should endeavor to make these machines transparent, regardless of whether or not they're used for hiring purposes or they're used for deciding whether or not you should get healthcare. Whatever the use of the machine, we should make sure that they're transparent and they're explainable. Just going to skip ahead. Okay. So what can you do? Broadly speaking, I've given you a bunch of examples, but I really think, you know, it comes down to this idea that if you're developing artificially intelligent machines, if you're developing artificial intelligent technology, consider something called ethics by design, wherein when you're designing your AI, when you're designing how when you decide who you're going to sell it to, when you decide how it's going to be implemented, consider some of the ethical concerns and try to deal with them in the production, in the development of the AI, rather than in the, you know, in post, in the actual later implementation of the AI by the end user. So that I think sort of summarizes what it is. So one other ethical concern I want to touch on before we end this, and that is going back to this question I asked you way back when at the beginning of the talk, is this: is Superman a person? And I ask you that because he's clearly not human, right? We all know he's from the planet Krypton. Krypton blew up. He came to Earth. If you didn't know, now you do know. Spoiler. Superman not a human, right? He's not a humanoid from Earth. He's not an Earthling. But we find it very hard to say that he's not a person. So when we define personhood legally or ethically, you know, there are a whole bunch of things that we can think about and consider in deciding who is and who is not a person, whether Superman is a person or he is not a person. we can think about things like genetics, cognition, I think, therefore I am, intelligence, creativity, whether or not people have emotional intelligence, whether or not they're conscious or aware, or whether or not society decides in an ad hoc sort of fashion whether or not something is a person or not. And I ask you this because we will have to decide, and in fact, we've made a lot of decisions already, whether or not an artificially intelligent machine is a person. In fact, the United States patent system and the United States copyright system, I think just this past week, the copyright system, and a couple months ago, the patent system decided that artificially intelligent inventors and artificially intelligent authors are not humans in the eyes of the intellectual property legal system. That's not the same in Australia, where artificially intelligent machines can be inventors. And so we have to decide, whether or not an artificially intelligent machine is a person or not a person, because there are rules and regulations, there are real life implementations that have to be decided in order to progress in this space. Now, there are, and this shouldn't come as a surprise to you, there are instances in the area of law where people are less of a person. So for example, in the area of abortion, euthanasia, the death penalty, or even children, we consider these people less legally a person. They don't have all the rights that you and I may have as a person, because we can either end their life or we can rule their life in the case of a child. On the flip side, we often in the legal sphere offer personhood to things that aren't human. So for example, corporations are often considered people legally for a whole bunch of things. In the United States, corporations are persons with regard to religion, with regard to speech, with regard to criminal law. So corporations can be people, not so actually for HOV lanes, for high occupancy vehicle lanes. There's been a number of efforts to have corporations sit next to you in the car. Someone had their articles of incorporation for their company in their passenger seats. They were stopped by a car. They said, but I have a legal person sitting next to me. I can be in the high occupancy lane, and they were told no. Animals often get quasi-human rights. I think there was a recent development with elephants where they were given human rights in some area. Oftentimes parts of nature, piece of nature gets, and whether or not artificial intelligence should be given personhood in the area of law is hard. Now, one of the things is sort of the Superman idea, right? If it looks human, if it acts human, you got to say it kind of is human, right? These robots are amazing. Shouldn't they be considered people? They look like people, they act like people, they dance better than a lot of people I know. Ought they be considered people? And in fact, in some instances, for example, we have Sophia, right, famously had more rights than many women in Saudi Arabia, and she was an artificially intelligent machine. And in fact, the Europeans have been thinking about this for some time, whether or not we should give robots some sort of personhood status in the EU. Of course, that failed a couple of years ago. I've spoken about the patent system. Davis is an artificially intelligent machine. In Australia, Davis can be an inventor. In the European Union, in Israel, and in the United States, it cannot. So here in Australia, it can. And let's just end with this. I had said way back, also earlier in the talk, one of the concerns when thinking about ethics and artificial intelligence is that what is ethically abhorrent tomorrow may be okay today, and what is okay today may be ethically abhorrent tomorrow. And so I think this will also come into play in the area of artificial intelligence. So consider this image here. This is a Boston Dynamics robot being tested by a guy to make sure that it can stay upright on an icy, I think it's icy, pavement. And we're watching this now, and perhaps you're giggling or whatever, or you think it's humorous or enjoyable or whatever. But I guarantee you in 20, 30 years from now, I'll get in trouble for showing this. How can I show this clear abuse of an artificially intelligent machine? How can we, in 30 years from now, perhaps in 30 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, we may see this as being ethically abhorrent, this abuse and mistreatment of an artificially intelligent machine. So again, something to consider. And I should take this off before I get in trouble in 50 years from now. So
wow.
So
Fascinating, sorry.
I'll end with this. If you have to take one thing home with you tonight, this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are, it is that the role of AI in commerce, in industry, in academia is rapidly growing. Whether or not you end up in academia, whether you not end up in industry, whether you end up in Israel or abroad, individuals, companies, academias, everyone should expect a role for AI in the future if it's not there already. And of course, I said one thing, but I'll give you a second, and that is that AI raises many difficult ethical and legal questions. As consumers, we already have very little faith in AI. We can chalk that up to Frankenstein. And as people who may develop AI in the near future or already, consider making things that are ethical by design. They should be integral to your development, integral to your research, integral to our future. So with 2 minutes to spare, I want to thank everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Grinbaum, it was fascinating. I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the viewers on Facebook as well. May I have one question at least? And the question is regarding the practical level. So the institution, the Mittler institution, what do you like? Do you publish like papers that are like leading or showing the way how to deal with those dilemmas in a practical level? Can people send you questions or consult with you or your colleagues at the institution? Because people sometimes have trouble in like figuring out the way themselves.
Sure. People can send me questions. I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask, but you can, I may give you some sort of reference to some sort of film or movie that says, hey, watch Black Mirror, and they'll tell you all the answers. But yes, we do publish a lot. We try to publish both in academic literature, primarily in the law literature. We published, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40, I don't know how many papers, lots of papers. We always publish with the students. We published already in the area of facial recognition technology, genomics, blockchain, Bitcoin, emerging food technologies. We're writing stuff right now on autonomous boats and on genetics in the blockchain. We currently have research going on in the area of facial recognition technology, in the area of sustainable fashion, in the area of digital twins, in the area of neurotechnologies, and there's in the area of converting the entire world of law into code, and what that will mean. There are countries that are actually doing this. Canada is pretty big in this. Australia, New Zealand, I think, are major sort of implementers of this technology. So we're broadly interested in everything and anything, and we are constantly on the lookout for people that want to write with us, collaborate with us, whether or not they're scientists, whether or not they're lawyers. I'm both, unfortunately, which causes great confusion in my head. But regardless of what you are, we're keen on interacting with everyone and anyone.
Great. Can you just tell us where we are comparing to other countries in terms of the law?
Israel?
Yes.
Well, Israel is pushing privacy law. It's doing a good job in that area. In terms of artificial intelligence, it really hasn't pushed any laws there. One thing that is interesting about Israel is that in all areas of emerging technologies, Israel often thinks about who its major trading partners are, because we're not building stuff for ourselves. We're building stuff for our major trading partners, whether or not that's Africa, Europe, America, whatever it is. Oftentimes the laws are actually somewhat developed, keeping in mind who the trading partners are. So for example, in the area of genetically modified organisms, the laws are very much, keep in mind the idea that our primary purchasers of Israeli produce are going to be the Europeans, and they are for some reason deathly afraid of genetically modified organisms. And so it's very hard not in sort of the production area of food to regulatory speaking, to develop GMO technology for production, whereas for research, we have sort of broad sort of opportunities to research in the area of GMO, but we have very limited opportunities to produce a GMO. And again, because the laws and the regulations are developed, keeping in mind that if we have GMO in our food supply, then the Europeans may say, well, we're done with Israeli food, we'll go somewhere else. So that's just one example. We did some work in the area of autonomous vehicles some time ago. Israel was thinking of implementing regulations from various other nations. They wasn't going to rewrite their own regulations. But for example, it's still a rule on the books that in Israel, you have to keep 2 hands on the steering wheel. That's how they get you for cell phones, right? Even if you're holding your cell phone, you're not on the phone with it, you're just waving it in front of your face, you get 1,000 shekel ticket for it, or 2,000, whatever it is today. So that's because the law says 2 hands on the wheel at all times. I don't know how smokers get away with it, but somehow they do. But that law has to change. If we want to have autonomous vehicles here in Israel, that's a basic sort of rule that has to change. Now, whether or not it will change, I don't know. So I think Israel is looking to develop new interesting regulations. Israel tends to be a little bit paternalistic in its regulations. So coming back to the area of genetics, whereas anyone in America can spit into a cup and send off their DNA to 23andMe, that's verboten here in Israel, not really allowed to do that. I mean, you can go abroad and do it, but you really can't do it in the country for a whole host of reasons. So again, in some instances, the law is at the forefront. In some instances, it's a little behind. So, like AI, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to that question.
Sure. I think we are out of time, but thank you so much for this fascinating webinar. I would just like to say in Hebrew, שוב תודה רבה, והוובינר הזה הוקלט, ניתן יהיה לצפות בהקלטה שלו בעוד כמה ימים, ובהקלטות של וובינרים קודמים באתר שלנו. בשבוע הבא, ב1 למרץ, נשמח אם תצטרפו אלינו לוובינר של מחקר וחדשנות מבוססי אמנות לטובת הקהילה המדעית עם דוקטור אייל פריד, הוא חוקר קוגניטיבי, מעצב אינטראקציה, יזם ומרצה ויועץ. עם רקע בקוגניציה ונוירוקוגניציה, דוקטור פריד למד ועבד כמעצב ממשקים עם התמקדות בממשקי מוח, מכונה ומכשור רפואי מתקדם. יכול להיות שזה מתקשר גם ל-AI, אבל תגלו את זה רק בשבוע. Yeah, you're very welcome to join us. תודה רבה, לילה טוב, בוקר טוב, צהריים טובים, ולהתראות.
ביי.